This is the Brave New Coin Crypto Conversation, hosted by Andy Pickering.
Hi everyone, Andy Pickering here. I'm your host and welcome to the Crypto Conversation, a Brave New Coin podcast where we talk to the people building the future in the Bitcoin, blockchain and cryptocurrency space. My guest today is Matthew Graham. Matthew is the CEO of Sino Global Capital, a team of Beijing-based investment bankers. Matthew is also the managing partner of Liquid Value, a consultancy focused on tokenizing traditional assets. Matthew studied quantitative finance at the University of California, Berkeley. He has an MBA and he was a hedge fund portfolio guy on Wall Street. But for the last 7 years or so, Matthew has been based in Beijing in China. And we're going to talk about that today. But first, welcome to the show and Happy New Year, Matthew.
Thank you very much, Andy, and Happy New Year to you as well.
Fantastic. And also, Happy New Year to the listeners. This is our first crypto conversation of 2020. We're officially into the second decade of blockchain, and I think it's probably going to be a roller coaster of a decade for Bitcoin, for blockchain, for banking, for money, for privacy, and probably for geopolitics as well. Matthew, China is right in the middle of this, so let's start with you. Where are you from and how did you end up in Beijing?
Sure, so I'm from Connecticut originally. Well, we moved a lot as a kid. We're an IBM family, but I spent more time in Connecticut than anywhere else. And one thing that has always been super appealing to me is being at the center of the action. So in 82, if I had been a generation older, I almost certainly would have gone to Tokyo. In 93, I'm sure I would have ended up in Silicon Valley. I wanted to be at the engine, at the center of change. And so that is what appealed to me about working in the China market. And I'm sure the reasons are extremely similar in terms of why I'm so fascinated and attracted by blockchain and crypto.
Talk me through Sino Global Capital. What do you guys do? Who are your clients and what is your role?
Sure thing. So for many years, we've represented international technology companies in mainland China for strategic partnership and investment. For example, we recently, a couple months ago, one of our clients that we grew up with officially became a unicorn. So that was pretty exciting. European carbon nanotube company. So that's been our traditional business. The concept was always that we would develop a sector competency, one or more sector competencies over time, and very naturally and organically, blockchain became our first sector competency. And actually, we are so all in on blockchain that we service our legacy clients, but we no longer accept non-blockchain clients. We're fully committed to the blockchain industry.
Wow. And so are your clients, are they based around the globe or are you focused on the Chinese market?
So our clients are based around the world, but a typical client would have a very strategic connection to the mainland China market, and the specific competency that we provide with our investment banking unit is our deep understanding of the China market, our wide network of relationships, things like that. So there has to be a very, very strong China focus. We very frequently have people come to us and they say, well, I just want to come to China and raise some money, and that's what I want to do. And that we don't accept those clients. We need to be working with people that have a very deep commitment to China in terms of their product, their focus, their long-term vision, not just drop by, raise money, and go back home.
That's why I was excited to talk to you, Matthew, because I'm glad you do have a good knowledge of the Chinese market, because China is the one country that has always had a major influence on Bitcoin and the wider cryptocurrency space. The majority of Bitcoin mining is, of course, based in China, and China's ever-changing stance towards crypto assets has tended to have an exaggerated effect on the volatile crypto markets. Many different nuances to this, of course, and we'll get into them. But as someone who has been based in China, from your perspective, is it frustrating or exciting to see the crazy market swings that happen when we hear, China bans Bitcoin or China embraces blockchain?
That's a good question. I guess it probably would be a little of both. I think there's really a fundamental lack of understanding, or only a very superficial, the most superficial understanding of the China crypto market internationally. And that probably goes both ways, by the way. I think it creates a lot of opportunities, and also, obviously, it can be a headache at times as well. Sometimes you see things, you're wondering, why are people reacting that way? And then you realize, they don't know that that's not important, or that is important, or that's not what's really going on, things like that.
Yeah, it is hard to understand sometimes what is really going on, not just in China, but, the world is a murky grey place, and the media can play tricks on people. Like, a good example is, I remember seeing there were some news headlines being thrown around about how China had banned Christmas decorations, or they were shutting down Christmas or something like that. And you were tweeting pictures of Christmas trees.
Yeah, I remember, I have been tweeting a lot recently because we're raising our profile a little bit. We have an investment fund as well, and our LPs are very, some of them are very private people, and crypto is complicated in China, but with the new government policy, our friends are a lot more comfortable with us raising our profile a little bit. So I've been tweeting more maybe as part of that. Did see when I was taking a short Christmas vacation, and I did see the incoming where someone was saying Christmas banned in China, and I was literally looking at a Christmas tree in a hotel lobby at a resort, like as that came in, and it's just really kind of ludicrous. I think one tendency is to think of, because of a lack of understanding and probably many factors, I think there's a very strong tendency to think of China as being an enormous country, but one that somehow has similar characteristics across the board, which fundamentally doesn't make any sense, because, there isn't any place like that. You can't talk about the United States and talk about San Francisco as if it's, Cleveland, Ohio. It just doesn't make any sense. So frequently what tends to happen is that some kind of local action, such as a small city cracking down because of an overzealous local official cracking down on Christmas displays, and they'll try to make it sound like that's all of China. So that's definitely one common trap that we've seen. And the recent nonsense about Christmas displays was an example of that. At the same time, I think it is important to understand that sometimes these generalizations are related to kernels of truth, such as the fact that the status of religion in China in recent years has changed somewhat, and I think there is less freedom of religion. Let's change the topic, but I think it's important to understand, A, generalizations, B, sometimes there's a kernel of truth that goes along with them.
Understood. And I think even so, you're exactly right. China is a vast place, and some official in some small town can make a pronouncement that can get into the media, and that's how things work. But at the same time, China does have a ruling party, and last year, October 25th, President Xi Jinping said, quite famously, of course, he began to talk about blockchain as an important breakthrough for the independent innovation of core technologies. And he said, we must clarify the main direction, increase investment, focus on a number of key core technologies, and accelerate the development of blockchain technology and industrial innovation.
Yes, quite a sweeping pronouncement. And I think it's super important to understand that is not like if, Trump or Obama or whomever had said something similar. Certain aspects of China are almost awe-inspiringly capitalist in nature, but at the same time, this is a top-down hierarchical society in many ways, and so when a pronouncement like that is made, fundamentally different from a Western politician saying something the same thing. It's almost a kind of mobilization, and I think that's super important to understand that these things are very much not said casually and they have extremely far-reaching consequences as people, business leaders and local politicians and entrepreneurs and investors, anyone and everyone at all different levels and functions of Chinese society uses these official pronouncements as cues in order to map out their strategy, map out their plan, because they come with a lot of incentives. They come with, it's just really enormously far-reaching. Very important to understand.
Yes, I think you're exactly right. And because at the time, I think, Bitcoin surged 40% on the back of that news, as Bitcoin likes to react to China news, obviously. But as you say, it's not really anything to do with cryptocurrencies.
No, it's really not.
It's more about China laying out their strategic plan from the top to continue their quest to challenge the US dollar and expand China's sphere of influence, right?
Well said. And I think that's the number one thing that's lacking with China, with understanding China, is nuance. That 40% surge would have made sense. In fact, it would have made sense for a much bigger increase if the China pronouncement had been about crypto. But it fundamentally was not. It was about blockchain. And blockchain technology, right or wrong, is viewed by the Chinese government as strategic in the same sense as 5G or AI. But that's not crypto.
No, you're exactly right. Yeah, so the Chinese, they see blockchain along with other emerging and important technologies, AI, Internet of Things, machine learning. Those are strategic technology pillars that will underpin the next decade of industrial innovation.
Exactly. So in the same way that they put a tremendous amount of muscle behind things like solar and electric cars, can expect that they will be doing these things for, again, 5G and AI and blockchain, not crypto.
Again, there's more nuance to even the term blockchain here because,
yes,
we're in the West, we tend to see, or a certain segment of the crypto industry certainly, and the early adopters especially, see blockchain from almost a libertarian.
Very much so. The Bitcoin early adopters are famously extremely libertarian, right? Most of them, right? Anarcho-libertarian or cypherpunk or et cetera, et cetera. But I think that's an important point, yeah.
And the point I'm making is that I don't think the Chinese, that's not how they see blockchain, is it? I imagine...
No, not at all.
I imagine they see blockchain as purely a method to increase efficiency at scale and all that good stuff.
Yeah, I think that's well said. They see it as strategic technology, a means of stoking the economy at a time when it's facing demographic headwinds and where there's a real need for a boost. It's a means of garnering efficiencies. To them, it's more like, you could put it in a bucket with, in terms of efficiency, at least, you could put it in a bucket with, a Six Sigma initiative or whatever. There's nothing libertarian about this from the perspective of the ruling party. That's certainly true.
No, there's not. And I want to talk about that side of things later in the show. So the other big China crypto narrative, of course, is that China is expected to deploy its state-issued digital currency, or DCEP. That's probably going to happen this year, right?
I would put maybe a question mark on that. But there is a possibility that it could happen this year, yes. I mean, I think a lot of these things, China, more than any other large country, can really move on a dime. They can turn that super tanker around real quick. But I still think we're talking about an enormous initiative, and I don't really have tech project management experience in my resume, but I think we all know that some of these things take longer than initially people might think. They've been working on this for years already, by the way, in terms of internal testing and research and things like that. This has been something that they've been working on for at least 3 or 4 years, by the way.
Absolutely. And, one view is perhaps that the announcement of the Libra project by Facebook, that seemed to speed things along, shall we say.
That's a theory. I think that I would classify that as a possibility.
Sure. Well, what do you see as the key, what are the benefits that China would get from being one of the first nation states to deploy a digital currency? It's not a proper blockchain. It'll be some kind of
it's definitely not a blockchain.
Some kind of centralized digital currency.
It's about as much a blockchain as a SQL server, right? So that's a fantastic question. I think by backdrop, it's important to understand that digital payments in China are already extremely advanced. When I go back home to the States, the thing about China is it's got one foot 10 years in the future and the other foot 10 years behind. So with electronic payments, they're 10 years in the future. I feel when I go back to the States, almost like I'm going back in time. People are using cash, and to me that's almost weird at this point. In fact, it is, because I haven't carried a wallet for almost 2 years now. Everything is my phone. My phone is how I make 99.5% of my transactions, using QR codes with either WeChat Pay or Alipay, both of which are hooked into my China bank cards. So my personal experience maybe is a little extreme, but much less than you might think. That's not an uncommon style in first-tier cities, by which I mean Shanghai and Beijing and places like that. So I think that's super important as backdrop. The second thing that's important to understand, though, is that there is still a fairly large, almost shockingly large population in China that has a very different experience, where they maybe even don't have internet yet. That number of people is larger than you think. So the first thing is that DCEP potentially could be a tool to further integrate rural populations into the digital age. So I think that's the first thing, that this could potentially be a tool for rural populations to become more integrated in the digital age. Number two, another aspect that I think is worth talking about that hasn't been talked about that much is that Alipay, owned by Alibaba, and WeChat Pay, which is part of WeChat owned by Tencent, are enormously powerful because so many people like myself are making almost all of their transactions using these digital payment rails today. And what we've seen in the past decade or so is an increase in state power, state-owned enterprises and such, to some extent encroaching upon private enterprise power. So to some extent we're having control being returned to the state, and DCEP potentially could be an example of that, where it's a little bit of a counterweight to Alipay and WeChat Pay. So I think that's something that hasn't been talked about a lot, that's super interesting to think about. And then the third point that I would want to make about DCEP is that potentially, on the margins, it could be, and certainly for sure this is part of the vision, it could be a tool to diminish status of the United States dollar as a global reserve currency. For sure that's part of the vision. I think that it's hard to say how effective that will be, but what is very likely is that neighboring countries with a huge dependence on China trade, will increasingly, once DCEP is rolled out, we'll start to see them conducting some of the settlement transactions, some of the trade will be conducted using DCEP, and potentially that could, on the margins, that could diminish USD status. So those are 3 points that I would want to make about DCEP right off the bat.
I should just point out for the listeners, anyone that doesn't know what DCEP stands for Digital Currency Electronic Payment.
Oh, yes. I almost forget sometimes myself. I just, people are saying DCEP, I just call it DCEP. Okay.
Exactly. But, if China do go ahead and deploy this, they can get a jump on other nation states. It allows for greater capital control. It's probably another powerful means to remove cash from the system, may help them impose taxes. potentially gives the state visibility over citizen transactions. So, a state-issued digital currency is a very powerful idea,
Exactly, yeah.
But it also really just puts into stark relief another really powerful idea, which is, Bitcoin, of course, as an open, borderless, decentralized, non-state issued digital currency.
I think that's a very strong point. DCEP and Libra, in my opinion, they're almost the antithesis of Bitcoin. This is really talking about using the same technology for the opposite purpose.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, and one is using state power and one is using corporate power, but they both are the opposite of Bitcoin, frankly.
It does speak to China's technological boldness, though, doesn't it, Matthew?
Yeah, it's a breathtakingly bold vision. There's no question.
China is tech-minded. They're engineering-minded.
Yeah.
The country has the ability to think on long-term time frames. Over the last 2 decades, we've seen China lift, billions of people out of poverty. These huge modern megacities have sprung up. Incredible feats of engineering, and China's become
was
the
a
world's
fishing village when I was born, right?
Yeah.
Literally, Shenzhen. So we're talking about a breathtaking is the word I would use, capacity for change.
Balaji Srinivasan he was the CTO at Coinbase. He's talked about how smart countries are run by engineers, and he always uses China as an example of that. So that's what I mean by, they have this engineering mindset. And that's why I think they can quite naturally understand blockchain in a way that perhaps Western governments aren't so easily inclined to. And you talked about this before as well, when you said that, China, as big as it is, has this ability to turn on a dime or, turn the aircraft carrier in another direction. Yeah, but China now has these Silicon Valley style tech unicorns of its own and has become a technology hub.
Yes, that's correct. I think that the unicorns are a function, of course, of the talented entrepreneurs and also the enormous market size. I guess the point I'm trying to make is that, first of all, I would say more technocrats than engineers. We could quibble about that, whatever. But I think it's the real point I want to make, though, is that it's important to understand, too, that when they have these top-down tech-centric visions, such as we saw with solar and electric car, will be a lot that happens, but there will also be, we can expect to see tremendous overinvestment, tremendous waste, things like that. We can expect to see a blockchain glut in many ways.
I saw you tweet also that you thought one of the next steps might be a digital ID, like a digital identity. And obviously, one view of that is that a digital identity can be tied to a digital wallet. And if that is aligned with, the Chinese state-issued digital currency, the state then has access to individuals' entire financial history. So that obviously has a dark side, which I want to talk about, but it also opens up various positive efficiencies, I imagine, in terms of, opening up commerce more, access to public utilities, health system, transport, and those kind of things. But do you think a digital ID is part of this rollout process?
Absolutely. So currently, Chinese nationals have a Shenfenzheng, which is kind of like driver's license plus social security number and a bunch of other things all rolled into one. So currently, there's already an ID that the vast majority of Chinese citizens have. And so we're already seeing this be digitized, and absolutely that's going to happen. That will lead to efficiencies, as you mentioned, and also it's a very powerful instrument of control. It's going to get rolled up with a bunch of other things, such as social credit, sesame credit, travel blacklists, which are already at a minimum hundreds of thousands of people are on that travel blacklist because they are a debtor or have some other kind of issue. So I think all these things are going to be combined and they're going to be digitized. And it's going to be very powerful. I think people are underestimating the implications.
Yeah, so let's dig into this a little bit there, Matthew. So the social credit system that you mentioned, so I've seen conflicting reports on this. I understand that it does exist, but is it just being trialed in some areas of China? Because it does sound, it's like that infamous Black Mirror episode, Nosedive, which is based on the same concept. Your access to transport, venues, and other people even is based on your score and the ratings other people can give you.
We already have that. There are already hundreds of thousands of people, literally at a minimum, hundreds of thousands of people who are on a travel blacklist. They can't access planes and trains. And already, I believe it's in the millions, the number of times people have been denied access to travel services. So that part, for sure, is already in place.
Well, if you tie it all this together, it does start to look very dystopian because, you add in other technologies like facial recognition, phone tracking, DNA sets, digital identities, state-issued digital money, as we've talked about, tie that up all together and you get an instant high-tech surveillance state or panopticon, whatever you want to call it.
I do want to back up, and your point, though, is correct that a lot of it is still piecemeal.
Sure.
And trials and programs and local initiatives at this point in time. But again, already aspects of it are firmly in place, such as the travel blacklist. Literally hundreds of thousands of people are on that list.
And the problem is all these things exist every country in the world, but the Chinese government is, I suppose, uniquely authoritarian enough to be able to pull everything together with little to no resistance. And by 2030, it could be... yeah, quite an interesting system of control.
Yeah, I'm not sure I want to dwell on these topics too much, but I think efficiency and instrument of control are two things we can certainly agree on.
Sure. So let's take a break and then we'll come back and let's talk about mining, tokenization, and more.
Crypto, the asset class that doesn't sleep. The markets move quickly with profits made and lost around the clock. It's a whirlwind and you've got to keep up. You need enhanced tools that deliver timely data and accurate analytics so you can make informed decisions. You need BNC Pro, a customizable, institutional-grade suite of applications to help you manage your crypto investments all in one place. Get accurate market data, track your trades or custom holdings, and see profit and loss at a glance. Monitor any asset, trading pair, or exchange using Brave New Coin's trusted market data. Integrate BNC Newsfeed and filter it to deliver only the news that matters to you. Never miss an opportunity, save time, and make better informed decisions. Finally, the all-in-one terminal experience you need to master this brave new asset class. BNC Pro, launching Q4 2019. Join the waitlist today at bravenewcoin.com.
So Matthew, do you have much insight into the Chinese mining industry?
Sure, so we have some. We have many friends that are miners. Actually, miners are our favorite. Certainly for me, they're my favorite people in crypto. In my experience, Chinese miners are always so fascinating and so fun. They're just unbelievably interesting people. So we are friends with a lot of miners, and we can provide some insight.
Okay, that's interesting. Why are they fascinating and interesting people?
Part of it is because, for me personally, I really enjoy being around engineer types or tinkerer types or gadget people, things like that. And so they frequently have that kind of personality. I think that's one aspect. They tend to be a certain kind of personality type. In another age, in another place, they might have been, a Texas oil driller or something like that. They're just really cool people.
People are still a little bit worried about the possible centralized threat of so much mining still being concentrated in China. I don't think it's quite as high as it was once.
It's pretty high.
It is pretty high. And the Chinese ruling party at any one time, we talked about how they can, move on a dime or, change their position.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of contradictions to China. They can move the battleship on a dime. That's true. Not everyone on the battleship that's moving on a dime may be following instructions It's a complicated place. So here's my view. Obviously, there's still enormous concentration of Bitcoin mining in China, specifically, especially in Sichuan. I think that's a black swan threat, no more and no less. It's an edge case. It's something where there is a very, very remote possibility of some kind of outlier case. And I don't think it's in any way likely, but it does exist as kind of a black swan possibility. That's kind of my view.
I think you're probably right.
I mean, I'd be much more worried about, EOS cartels and things like that versus Bitcoin mining concentration. I think it's something that's very unlikely to be an issue. It's a very, very much an edge case.
Tell me, is there still this phenomenon of sneaker trading? And by sneakers, I mean this phenomenon of Chinese crypto speculators. They're buying tokenized versions of rare sneakers, right? What's that about?
Sure. So I have not seen this recently, but there was a period where there was a little bit of a fad where several of these local Sino type exchanges, these bucket shops, obviously they're having trouble differentiating themselves because there's no real value there. So some of them started adding little gimmicks. For example, there was a period of time when you could trade sneakers. I know nothing about premium sneakers basically, but I guess you could get, I don't know, what is it, a Yeezy sneaker or something? I don't know. So people were hot potatoing these rare or high-end sneakers on crypto exchanges for a brief period of time a few months ago. This may be, I know that sneaker trading to some extent is popular in China kind of in general, but it was a little bit of a crypto fad for a brief period of time. I haven't come across it in a couple months though.
And I think Nike took out some kind of Ethereum patent at the end of last year as well.
Yeah, I did see that. I think that was, I'm quite sure that was unrelated. Certainly there is the concept that you could have these NFT sneaker trades and things like that. I think it's all a little strange to me personally, but then again, I don't really understand video games either, so maybe I'm not the right person to ask. Or TikTok. TikTok's the other thing I don't get.
Yeah, no one gets TikTok.
Okay. Somebody does. Somebody's using it.
Yeah.
A lot of people. Yeah.
Shout out to the TikToks.
Yeah.
Look, well, speaking of tokenization, though, Matthew, let's talk digital securities because so that's part of your business, isn't it?
Digital securities were a part of our investment thesis, and we made several strategic investments in STOs in the past 2 or 3 years. But as we all know, that aspect of crypto has ripened considerably slower than many of us have wished.
Yes.
Yeah. So we have a fond liquid value, and STOs we made several STO investments. It's not currently a major part of our thesis, but we've made STO investments in the past.
Here at Brave New Coin, we've been watching the security token offering space as well, but the progress in 2019, I think, was probably slower than most of the industry expected.
Yes. A lot of regulatory red tape, a lot of people that don't want these things to happen. Some very serious entrenched interests. And I think also hasn't quite been that killer app type feature. I don't think it's not enough to be able to say, oh, well, this will save you 5 to 10% on issuance costs or something like that. If that's your elevator speech, then it's not going to happen. So I think what needs to happen is more of a killer app, so to speak, a killer app aspect in terms of the programmable nature of the beast in terms of things like that, rather than trying to eke out efficiencies.
Yeah, sure. That makes sense. And I think, as you say, saving 5% on a fee
even
might
10
not
or
be
20,
enough
it's not going to move. It's not going to lead to traction. There needs to be. It's like if you try to compete. I mean, Wall Street is like a Google, right? bigger, right? So it's like if you try to say, well, our search engine is 5, 10, 20% better than Google. So you're not going to, what are you going to do? You're not going to make any, it's not going to happen. You need a 10x type thing. You need a killer feature. So I think that is most likely to come from the programmable intelligence that you can have with STO securities, but I don't think that, I think it's, we're not there yet.
Well, let's finish off on China, Matthew. What are some of the key misconceptions that you think people have in the West about, the crypto markets in China? What are the differences between, I know this is a big topic, but let's get into it. What are the difference between Western markets, Chinese crypto markets, Western investors, Chinese investors?
That is a big topic. Let me try. The misconceptions far exceed the conceptions, right? Let me give it a go. This is a very tough question because there's just so much to unpack. Some of the important things to understand are that in China, this is a very retail-driven phenomenon. I think that's one thing that's super important to understand. I'm not sure if that's necessarily a misconception, but I think it's super important to understand that it's not like you come over here and Chinese investors are ex-Goldman guys. That's important to understand. The second thing is that the speculative nature of the investment is extraordinary, beyond anything that you could imagine. It's a lot of unsophisticated retail investors that are looking to, double their money by a month or two, or, it's just all kinds of crazy stuff. So obviously we try to stay away from that circus in every way that we can, but it's in certain ways it's an inescapable feature of China crypto. The fact that you have unsophisticated retail investors en masse looking to go to a casino. And by the way, that's why we see these crazy things like Plus Token and all these schemes and people that have come from MLM and P2P and things like that. We know that that's true in the West in many ways as well. But we're really turning the volume up to 11 here. It's really a next level thing. The next thing that I think is important to understand is that Bitcoin is not banned. Even cryptocurrencies are not banned. The government has two sensitivities that are third rails, I think is the common parlance, right? The third rail is the part of the train rail that's electrified and you can't go near it. So the third rail, there are two third rails from the perspective of the Chinese government. And the first is the fact that they have a very robust currency control regime. A Chinese national can convert up to, I think it currently is 50,000 USD from renminbi to foreign currency. They can do 50K USD, I think it is, per year and no more. People try all kinds of ways to get around that. And the Chinese government is super concerned that crypto could be one of those ways, and they're very, very sensitive to that, and they will try to control that in every way they can. So the first third rail is fiat, meaning in this case renminbi, to crypto. That on-ramp is super, super sensitive. And then the second thing related to what we talked about just now with the crazy speculation with unsophisticated retail investors, the third rail is the social stability imperative. So anything that, with Plus Token being the perfect example, anytime you have a situation where there's some kind of scam that's mushrooming that could potentially cause a large group of people to lose money and want to get together and protest against something somewhere, the Chinese government is very concerned about that. And by the way, that could be a scam, or that could even be potentially a real project that went bust, but it's still causing a lot of commotion. So that's the third rail. Any type of, not as much a large institutional investor that lost a ton of money, they're not actually as concerned about that. But if there's like 50,000 people or 100,000 people, which in China that can happen easily, that all lost a little bit of money on the same investment, scam or not, especially scam, but even if it were not, they're going to be really concerned about that, especially if these people are mobilizing. So I think it's super important to have that understanding. Related to that, one thing that Westerners have a very hard time appreciating is that, for example, in the United States, roughly you might say 90% of things are black or white, and there's like a little gray area. Things are illegal or they're not illegal, and it's pretty clear. In China, That's definitely not the case, and that's by design because it's an instrument of control. You have 10% of things that are illegal, 10% of things that are legal, and then you have a vast swath which is gray, and that's the way it works. And so when you start talking about things are legal or illegal, you really need to be talking about, are they white, black, or gray? That's another thing that I would add is an important point as well. So that's for starters. This is a very tough question, but that's a few initial thoughts.
Thank you, Matthew. Look, I know we could talk for hours on that topic and probably never get to the bottom of the plus token scam.
Oh my God. Don't get me started.
No. Let's take another quick break and then I'll let you go, Matthew. We'll finish off with the Crypto Conversation hot take round.
Whether you're an enterprise fund manager or a retail trader, buying and selling cryptocurrencies successfully requires price discovery you can rely on. Brave New Coin's liquid indices provide trusted US dollar prices for Bitcoin, Ethereum, and Ripple. Featuring end-of-day or intraday outputs, you can count on the BLX, ELX, and XRPLX for accurate US dollar pricing for smart contract oracles, settlement price discovery, net asset valuation, and performance analysis. Visit bravenewcoin.com to find out more.
I like to finish each Crypto Conversation podcast with a rapid fire round of Crypto Conversation hot takes. Are you up for it?
I like it.
All right, Matthew, I just want your hot takes here. Here we go. Take your best shot. Matthew Graham, where do you sit on the Bitcoin maximalist to multi-coin opportunist spectrum?
Oh, good question. I'm definitely not a Bitcoin maximalist. This shouldn't be a religion. This should be about designing things that make sense. That's my hot take.
All right, Matthew, what would you say is your firmest conviction crypto opinion?
Okay, so here's one. The Shenzhen Stock Exchange just came out with a index of 50 companies listed, public Chinese companies listed on the Shenzhen Stock Exchange that have business interests that are related to blockchain. That Shenzhen 50 index will outperform Bitcoin in 2020.
Ooh, that is a big call. I like it. Who wins the American presidential election 2020? That's this year.
So Trump loses, and then it gets more complicated. I very much like Elizabeth Warren. And then after that, I like Bernie Sanders and Andrew Yang, or Yang, as he's sometimes called. And I think Yang Gang, exactly. And in Chinese, it would be Yang. But anyway, and I am very, 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 very much not a Trump person. And I both want and think that he will have a historic loss in 2020.
Well, it'll be interesting to see because he may have just kicked off a war with Iran today, right?
Yeah, I know.
So we spoke about Mr. Yang. He's come up on this podcast a few times. UBI as a potential fix for AI-induced automation. Is this a good idea?
I love this question. My hot take is that wealth inequality is one of the most significant issues of our time, and it will only become more significant because really we're, for many reasons, living in a new gilded age. This needs to be a top-line issue addressed, and it needs to be addressed by governments. UBI is one potential way to address it. I'm not sure it's the best way, but this needs to be a top-line issue.
Hey, Matthew, Bill Gates famously said, "We tend to overestimate what we can accomplish in 2 years and underestimate what we can accomplish in 10. What do you think the blockchain space looks like in 10 years?
Unless you're like Philip K. Dick or someone like that, I think the only way to win on questions like these is not to play, right? Who was it Thomas Watson that said there'd never be a need for more than 4 computers for personal use, something like that, and he was the CEO of IBM, right, back in the 50s or 60s. This is a technology that is barely more than a decade old. It's something that has enormously powerful network effects. where it will take us, I think that it's almost impossible to say.
On a similar note, though, Matthew, William Gibson said the future
William Gibson,
is...
that's what I was trying to think of. William Gibson might be able to predict 10 years in the future, but I said Philip K. Dick, but I wanted to say William Gibson could do 10 years in the future, but man, is he on a short list.
Well, my favorite William Gibson quote, and you will have heard this, he said, "The future is here, it's just not evenly distributed."
That's a great quote again, yeah. You've got some good quotes. That one and the Bill Gates quote are some of my personal favorites. And I believe them to be very, very true.
Can you think of an example of the future being here right now, but most people just aren't really aware of it?
I think the fact that I'm starting to see robots everywhere in a consumer way. Staying at a hotel a few weeks ago, and I had my coffee delivered, as I do every morning because I need it. And then they sent the delivery person dropped off the coffee at the front desk, and I hear some kind of weird automated voice outside my door, and I open up the door, and there's a goddamn robot with my coffee inside its canister or whatever. And there are robots that this is something that's starting to happen in China that I think will definitely expand, and it's starting to happen with these weird use cases. But a restaurant the other day, and instead of a serving person, it was a robot equipped with the trays for the food. I think we're going to just see robots everywhere. And I'm not talking about factories, I'm talking about delivery, placing a lot of service workers, which obviously goes back to your, to Yang and UBI and things like that.
That's right, Matthew, but let's zoom out. What do you think is the long-term future for the human race? Do you see dystopia or utopia?
So I think this is a pendulum that swings back and forth, and one of the unique features of growing up at the time I did in the United States was that Francis, how do you say his last name, Fukuyama, that wrote The End of History and things like that, everything looked so utopian. And I think since 2001, it's kind of been this dystopian swing on the pendulum, and I hope that things will swing back soon towards more of a utopian direction. But I think this is a pendulum that swings back and forth. You have democratizing influences like the internet in its early stages, and then they become increasingly centralized and dystopian. Then you have something like crypto that breaks through again and has utopian impulses. It's the arc of history. I hope we'll take a swing towards utopian, though, sooner rather than later.
Hey, that was nicely said. And finally, Matthew, what is your favorite science fiction book, film, or show, or science fiction universe? Let's put it like that.
That's a good question. I think that as a kid, I just love Star Wars. So I'm going to have to go with Star Wars out of nostalgia, but I did really love Westworld as well.
Nice. I enjoyed Westworld. I saw the new Star Wars a couple of nights ago. As much as I loved Star Wars as a kid, didn't really rate it.
I haven't seen it yet. No spoilers, please, but I heard not that good.
All right. Hey, thank you for talking to us, Matthew. Take us out. The microphone is yours. Tell the people where they can find you on your various platforms, what you got going on. Go for gold.
Sure. So the easiest way to find me is probably on Twitter. And you can tell that I'm not a marketing type person by my Twitter handle, which is, believe it or not, MG0314A. That's the worst Twitter handle ever, but that's mine, MG0314A. So you can certainly find me there. And I won't do marketing, but I will definitely have strong opinions.
All right. Hey, thank you, Matthew. Okay, there you go, everyone. I hope you enjoyed that. And as I said, Happy New Year. It is 2020. Thanks for listening to the show. Links to Matthew's firm, Sino Global Capital, are in the show notes. Hope I didn't offend anyone with my Star Wars commentary there. Did enjoy the film, but slightly underwhelmed as well. Have been enjoying The Mandalorian, though. That is a good show. That is an exciting new dimension to the Star Wars universe. Did you think so? Tell me what you think. Get at me. You can email me, andy@bravenewcoin.com, or get at me on Twitter at Andy Pickering NZ. See you real soon. Lots of new podcasts coming your way. All the best for a fantastic year ahead. But for now, this was the Crypto Conversation for Brave New Coin.